The 2025 NFL head coaching landscape appears to be set, so we're offering our takes on the new hires today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league. I'm a Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Joe, one thing we did not talk about yesterday in the debrief of the big game. Did you have a favorite commercial?
I'd be lying if I really said I paid attention to them.
Mm.
Did you dial in? You were watching them?
No, I didn't really watch any of the commercials, but I did have a favorite. It was the Mountain Dew seal commercial, where they put his head on the actual seal to sing "Kiss from a Rose."
I saw that's one that caught my attention because the person I watched the game with said, "Oh, seal on a seal."
Yeah,
and I looked at the TV. And,
baby,
yeah,
it's as much seal as you're going to get on this program from a vocal standpoint. But that was my favorite commercial.
I'll agree with you because it's the only one I remember.
Great, very good. Well, that I think. Good excuse for that to be the last time we talk about the Super Bowl. No need at this point. It's done.
Right.
Other than acknowledging the Philadelphia Eagles when they come up throughout the course of our offseason content plan. But Eagles not making a head coaching change. So there's no reason to talk about the Eagles on today's show. We're talking new hires. We're talking old faces in new places. We're talking some superlatives for situations, and we're going to start with the two veterans that are getting another crack at being NFL head coaches. Let's start with old PDC, Pete Carroll, Las Vegas Raiders. Their process kind of felt like it was a gradual roundabout way to land on Pete Carroll, but Pete Carroll, obviously his resume speaks for itself. Former Super Bowl winning head coach, built that Seahawks program up in a big, big way after being the architect of a championship program at USC and was the head coach at the NFL level before that. So a lot of NFL experience for Pete Carroll. What do you think of this hire?
Listen, I'm not Pete Carroll's biggest fan, but I do think that there is the right coach at the right time for the right place. And I can look at this Raiders situation and consider the moves that they've made at head coach, their last several failed hires, and realize that what this team really needs is a culture change and someone to come in and lay a foundation. And Pete Carroll's older. Is he 73, if I'm not mistaken, something like that?
He's up there.
He's up there. And so I think he even signed like a 3-year deal, which is not a normal amount of time. Typically, head coaches, when they're hired, they start with that 5-year deal. And I think there's an acknowledgement of what he's here to do. Come in, lay a foundation, and get this thing trending in the right direction. And I think part of what Pete Carroll's job is probably to develop a successor. And I like the idea of Patrick Graham potentially as the defensive coordinator. We've heard so many good things about him for a long time. But throughout this laying of a foundation and building a culture, also get your succession plan in place to really get this thing right, because it's been an ugly stretch for the Raiders. And I think Pete Carroll obviously brings legitimacy with his resume, but also does the thing that this team really needs, and that's someone to lay a foundation to really advance it moving forward, as opposed to continuing to be stuck and replacing everybody every couple of years when you're in a really tough division that saw 3 other teams go to the playoffs this year.
Yeah. Obviously, the mountain to climb is the division for the Raiders. That makes it such a challenging outlook. And you mentioned the culture change and the duration for Pete Carroll as he's back and immediately becomes the oldest head coach in the league.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think he was the oldest head coach when he left. And then he came back in a new opportunity after a sabbatical year. But, it was Josh McDaniels makes it less than 2 seasons. Antonio Pierce goes from interim to coach, and he's out after 1 year without the interim tag. And John Gruden was obviously mired in a scandal at the beginning of year 4, and he was out after they kind of progressively built a winner, and they won more games in each of those 4 seasons. But the circumstances there obviously necessitated a change with Gruden. Del Rio made it 3 seasons. Dennis Allen didn't make it 3 seasons. Hugh Jackson was one and done. Tom Cable took the interim tag from Lane Kiffin, who lasted a season and a half, and then Cable was 2 more years after that. Norv Turner was 2 years. Bill Callahan was 2 years. And then you're back to John Gruden's first tenure with the team.
Yeah.
And that's since the turn of the millennium. That's been the coaching situation. So I'm not fazed at all by 3-year contract in short window, because they obviously have so much to change about the identity of the organization. I think that's the best thing Pete Carroll does.
Right.
So I'm with you 100% as far as that hire with Tom Brady and his influence coming in, and there should be a different feel to how the Raiders go about their organizational business and building a football team and building a program, with Tom and his influence and Pete Carroll and the experience that he's had at both the college and the pro level doing it. And I think the ironic thing about Pete is one of the best things Pete Carroll does, I think, is have that culture building nature while simultaneously being able to relate to today's athletes.
Yeah.
And when you consider, it's ironic that the oldest coach has a good ability to do that, but I think that goes back to the time that he spent at USC, and how those experiences lend themselves well now to Pete Carroll working with the modern NFL athlete.
So we're in on Pete Carroll to the Raiders.
Mike Vrabel, Patriots. This one's gotten some thought, so I'm glad that we don't have to bury a ton of time here on Vrabel, but I think when you consider, Joe, the experience that he has around what that organization has been like, I think my concern is for New England continuing to chase the model of the Patriot way. And Vrabel, I think, is different in enough ways where this has a really good chance of being successful. But, all of the commentary with the hiring being about the legacy and the Patriot way and restoring the glory, it's like, you guys are in a new chapter. Like, don't do the Dennis Allen off the heels of Sean Payton thing in New Orleans and try to cling on to like the last bits and remnants of that. Let this be its own chapter of the team, while acknowledging he has all those learned experiences from being a part of those old Patriots programs.
And of course, hiring Josh McDaniels as the OC really kind of takes you right back into, we're just doing the thing here. Right. But I will say this about Vrabel. He hired Matt LaFleur and Arthur Smith in Tennessee, right, who wind up being head coaches. And so there's a level of trust that I think he's earned. And obviously McDaniels has had a very good career, but obviously that also coincides with coaching Tom Brady, and he hasn't really been able to do that in other places. And so it feels a little different, but also the same at the same time. But what an opportunity for Vrabel with the quarterback that they have in place in Drake May, with the resources that exist, both draft capital and cap space. I mean, it's a real opportunity to get it right. And I think that he certainly wants to be there, right? I think this is a spot that's near and dear to him. And I have a level of optimism for how this is going to work out, but there is a piece of me that's like, can it just not be the same type of people all the time? Like, really just do something different. So we'll see if it works out this time.
Yeah. I think the concern that I have is not with Mike Vrabel himself. And it's not necessarily with the amount of resources that they have. It's this whole process of hiring from ownership. Like, what Robert Kraft said in the process of letting go Gerard Mayo, that they committed to Jerod Mayo in large part, succession plan aside. He was getting interviews for other places, and it facilitated them to commit. And then Mike Vrabel interviews with the Jets, and you flush that whole plan out and then make this immediate pivot to Mike Vrabel. So the Krabs obviously have a sterling reputation as NFL owners with 2 decades of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and the stability that provides. This is kind of uncharted waters for them. And I hope that they take the appropriate hands-off approach to let the assets that they have, and Mike Vrabel is the guy you trust to do it, to do it right.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Steelers and quarterbacks. Kind of always had it figured out.
Right.
Oh boy, now we got to figure this out. All right, speaking of figuring it out, we'll talk about some other coaching hires and if they figured out finding the right guy. We'll do that here on the other side of it, folks. Be sure to stick with us. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at Jason Tatum for more than 29 points. The best part, Prize Picks is quick and easy. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and they're fast and secure withdrawals means when I get winnings, they come in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for an even better value. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
Let's start with the big name for the new hires. Ben Johnson, after years of flirtations and overtures, he finally makes a commitment, and he lands in Chicago with the Bears and Caleb Williams, and stays in the NFC North and makes it a point to talk smack to Matt LaFleur in his pregame presser and leaning into the rivalry with Chicago and all that good stuff. But of all the opportunities that Ben Johnson has had, what do you think about this being the one he actually takes?
I think $13 million a season says a lot. Yeah, I think you could talk about the appeal of Caleb Williams and, some young talent on the roster. It's $13 million. I think that was massively influential in this being the place that he ultimately goes. And obviously, I think a lot of Ben Johnson in his tenure in Detroit and what he was able to unlock. And I think there's probably not enough credit given to how much he was able to elevate a lot of players, like Jared Goff playing the best football of his career, MVP, getting MVP votes. Amon-Ra St. Brown, loved him as a prospect, but let's be honest, he's like a 4th-round pick and comes in and winds up being one of the best receivers in the league and just unlocking the potential of a lot of different players. I think it's terrific. And I think what it really comes down to, and we probably should have said this in the opening segment, a lot of these hires are based on, all right, what did you do with what you had? Right? Well, how did you perform as the coordinator of this particular unit? But ultimately that matters, but culture and leadership of men, all of that is going to be being a football administrator. All of those things are so instrumental. And I'm not saying Ben Johnson isn't those things, but there's a difference between, are you Sean McVay or are you Shane Steichen? Right. And I don't know where Ben Johnson falls on that lexicon. I see the appeal for what he did in Detroit. I like schematically what he has to offer. And I think he's got a great opportunity with a talented young quarterback in Chicago, but this is one that I think we have to see it play out. And obviously that's true for all of these, but I don't come in with the same level of like, I really kind of get it in terms of Carroll and Vrabel and experience and what that's going to mean for those places. I don't know what Ben Johnson's going to mean for Chicago, but I did like the job he did in Detroit.
Well, and part of that, right, the first 2 guys, you have proof of concept of what they look like as NFL head coaches.
Sure, yeah.
Where, all of the guys we're going to talk about, we don't have proof of concept for. But for Ben Johnson specifically, I think the thing that's really interesting is, and I think this will be the big key indicator of success for his program in the first few years, is That offensive line in Detroit with Decker and Ragnow and Sewell, and then they have Zeitler, who was a good player, and Graham Glasgow wasn't good this year, but in previous years was a good player for them, and Jonah Jackson got $16 million a year from the Rams. So they've had a lot of assets up front, right? And the diversity of the menu of how you go about game planning on any given week was so vast because of that unit. And then you contrast that to Chicago. Joe, here are the offensive linemen under contract for the Bears for this upcoming offseason for 2025 as of right here and right now, under contract in 2025. Darnell Wright, first round pick, 2023. It's a good start. Braxton Jones, Kieran Amagaje, Ryan Bates, and Jordan McFadden. That's it. Those are the only offensive linemen under contract. So you have a blank slate that you have to build and get right. And I think that discrepancy between what he had versus what he has, even with a more physically talented quarterback, I think is going to be one of the key indicators for what kind of success he has, not just in 2025, but also probably 2026.
Going to need to not only take advantage of what this draft has to offer, but free agency, right? They got to get some experienced offensive line talent in here. And have you done a big research project on free agent offensive linemen? Do these things typically work out? Like, what's the prospects here?
There are success stories, but not usually at the ones you throw all the money to.
Yeah. And I feel like they're that team I'm almost cast to throw the money at the guys, and it's going to drive up these markets, and these guys are going to get paid a ton. We saw it last year, right? We saw it last year with Damian Lewis and Rob Hunt. And these guys could be even bigger this year.
And it was Jonah Jackson and Kevin Dotson got $16 million apiece, and big time dollars for some interior guys. And the entire interior trio of Chicago is a blank slate right now.
Yeah.
Let's go to the Jets, who interviewed everybody. Very thorough process, which I don't think is a bad thing. I know it got clowned on a little bit, but they end up landing on what was one of the early names pegged as a potential favorite for them, which is Aaron Glenn. And Aaron Glenn, the other coordinator in Detroit, is part of the exodus from the coaching staff, and takes over for another defensive-minded head coach in Robert Saleh. And obviously they have a lot of resources tied into that side of the ball, which I think can help this process for New York. But it sounds like they've made a decision with Aaron Rodgers, so that they are transitioning, as is reported right now, at the quarterback position. They want to kind of, with a new GM, and that's the other thing about Chicago we didn't really even get into at all, is Ryan Poles is a sitting GM making this hire as the pre-existing persona. The Jets did the whole thing. We sweep clean the executive suite. We sweep clean the head coaching suite. So we're bringing everybody in on the same page. And I think that'll be a good thing for them, because that's, I think, the kind of lockstep you have to be in order to make the decision to move on from a future first ballot Hall of Famer, when you don't really know who's going to play quarterback for you as a result of this decision.
There's a ton to figure out with the Jets, but I will say that Aaron Glenn became like my favorite head coaching candidate throughout the season. And then I found myself actually getting a little frustrated with Aaron Glenn, watching that Detroit defense have the attrition that it did with injuries. And then I'm like, dude, you're really just going to keep playing three linebackers, man coverage, and blitz all the time? Like, you're going to, like, Ezekiel Turner and David Long and Quan Alexander are going to be on your team for like 3 days, and then they're going to play like 20 snaps each, and you're just going to rotate like, what are we doing? You know, I kind of got really frustrated with it because I thought he was being stubborn. But then the more I thought about it, it's like, and I'll say this, the hiring of Steve Wilkes as a defensive coordinator is something that I really like, because I think they're very philosophically different.
Yeah.
I reminded myself of the reasons that I liked Aaron Glenn. I think this dude is a leader of men. I think he's a culture builder. I think he's trendy in all the right ways with the player coaches, and, you know, a guy that obviously had an amazing career with the Jets. I think this does feel like the right coach at the right time to come in lay a foundation that needs to be laid with the Jets. I mean, you talk about just a team that's been in the basement for a long time. It's this team. It's the Jets. And I think Aaron Glenn is like that fiery dude that's going to establish culture, be a leader. And you can disassociate any frustrations that you had with how he coached that defense. You can realize that he's got those core values that I think are the most important in being a head coach. And I really am a fan of this move for the Jets, especially with the Wilkes hire, because I think that says something to me about how he's open to, not just being stubborn and doing it one way. I think that there's going to be a lot of good collaboration there.
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly as far as, even just the success in the same light of Mike Vrabel and his learned experiences with success with the Patriots as a player, right? Aaron Glenn has that same experience in New York, kind of understands what is necessary to have success in an environment like New York with the New York media and the New York press and the New York fan base, and having the ability to kind of have a thumb on that. It feels like such a big barrier for the New York teams right now, more so than in almost any other market, because of the influence that it has and the distractions that it creates. And I like Aaron Glenn's hire for that as well. And I think you make a great point about not coming in and being so hard-headed, my way, my defense, this is how we're going to be, trusting another accomplished coach to come in and have some level of collaborative nature with how you run your defense, I think is a great sign for the Jets and Aaron Glenn.
All right, we got a bunch more to get to here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with us. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, FanDuel customers, new customers, can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
So we had 6 vacancies, correct?
7
vacancies. Good start, Kyle.
Yeah.
We've done 4, so we have 3 to get to.
Yep.
Let's start with Jacksonville. We have Jacksonville, Dallas, and New Orleans left. Draft dudes do math. That's 4 plus 3. Duval.
It's the eye. You got to get the eyebrow thing,
Yeah. Liam Cohen has this big saga in Jacksonville where he's interviewing and he's rumored to be the pick after they don't get Ben Johnson. And then he pulls himself out. And then Shad Khan says, oh, well, wait, no, I was really going to fire Trent Baalke after the draft this whole time. Let's just do it now so we can get the coach hire that we want. And then Liam Cohen comes in and doesn't get $13 million, but he gets pretty darn close, it sounds like, to be the head coach in Jacksonville.
Kyle, I'll admit that I'm concerned here. And I think when you look at Liam Cohen, offensive coordinator for Tampa Bay, and what that could mean for Jacksonville's offense and Trevor Lawrence, I'm a big fan. I love that part. But for every reason why I love the hire of Pete Carroll in the Raiders is why I'm concerned about this one, because I don't feel like I'm getting any of that. You want to talk about a team that absolutely needed a culture builder, a true leader that can come in and just completely change everything about the way that Jacksonville Jaguars football has existed for a very long time. I mean, they needed that in a big way. And I don't know what Liam Cohen has to offer. He's 39. He doesn't really have very significant experience. He's Tampa's OC in 24, Kentucky's OC in 23, the Rams OC in 2022, but we know what that means. It's Sean McVay. Back to Kentucky in 2021, QB. I don't see a robust resume. I don't see long tenures anywhere that he can really pull from and apply to a situation that is desperate for somebody to come in there and really be the guy that can change the direction of this franchise. And so, yeah, I'm cool. Like Baker, that offense, that's going to be an exciting part. But like the overhaul culture guy, man, I at least have a level of concern here about that.
Yeah, I think it's fair to point out, and I would say this: I'd put Coen maybe not in the same bucket of Ben Johnson as far as like the X's and O's hires, but he's not too far off of that as far as like creativity and play design and tying everything. It's the X's and O's element of this is going to be a home run. You get concerned when coach hires happen because you're chasing the X's and O's elements instead of some of the things that we've talked about as why we like Carroll and are at least optimistic about Vrabel in New England, despite some of the kind of scattered shot ownership influence there. And I will say this for Shad Khan. I think Liam Cohen putting his feet to the fire in the courtship here gives this a better chance to be successful than what I would have otherwise picked, because Shad Khan in a lot of times throughout his ownership of the team has been loyal to a fault and been too patient with executives and coaches and has let this process play itself out longer than it arguably should have. And I know we sit here and get on this show and we covet longevity and stability, and we just got done giving all the flowers to Philadelphia for no playoff wins in the first 7 years of Howie Roseman's tenure, and they stuck with him because the process was good. The Trent Baalke experience, there's nothing really left to learn, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that Shad broke his own tendencies to get this hire done, maybe it's one of those ones where I think you'll look back at and say the process to get to the resolution wasn't necessarily good, but you can find success through bad process at times. And I think that's where you're hopeful that a marriage of a really good play designer with a talented young quarterback can allow that facilitation to happen for you. And through that process of that pairing having success, you can have the breakthroughs that you need.
Yeah, and listen, I think Jacksonville has talent.
They do have talent.
Yeah,
I think that's part of what's so frustrating about Jacksonville.
Yeah, no doubt.
Now, I don't know about the most talented roster the team's had in the history of franchise. This is the bill of goods that was sold, but they do have a lot of talent. Yeah. Speed of talent with the Cowboys. Brian Schottenheimer stepping in for Mike McCarthy after Mike plays hardball and then is waking up this morning listening to Draft Dudes and gets left without a dance partner after betting on himself here.
This is more of a characteristic hire for the Cowboys than I think we give it credit to. It's like
Jason Garrett thing, right? It's
Jason Garrett. This is the Jerry Jones hired Dave Campo. He hired Chan Gailey. Like this is very much on brand. And I think this is what it comes down to. They have a massive investment in Dak Prescott. Massive. He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. He's coming off of injury, and they need to maximize that. And so this feels like they believe this is their best chance to do that. And I get the criticisms. I really do. But I'm just saying this smells like we need everything out of Dak, and we like continuing with Schottenheimer to unlock that.
I also think there's an element of Dallas when we talk about team cultures, and you hear some of the stories about Dallas and the just the prominence in the headlines, right? And that's kind of the culture of Dallas right now, is always wanting to be in the spotlight as compared to kind of laying more low profile as an organization. And Jerry likes to hop on the radio and threaten the hosts for asking tough questions, like all kinds of stuff like that I think made this probably one of the less attractive jobs despite some of the talent and the presence of Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
Which I think further complicates what the hiring process looks like. So it kind of feels Cincinnati-esque in a certain way. We remember like Marv Lewis was there for so long, and Marv Lewis has to have sit-down meals with the Browns to go over the Brown family to go over game plans and stuff like that. Like that's not exactly what's happening in Dallas, but I feel like the candidate list has to be a little different if
no doubt.
You as the Joneses want to continue with what you have impressed the culture of your football team.
Yeah. We've romanticized about the big names, right? Whether it's Lincoln Riley or Sean Payton or Deion Sanders. And here, right, dude. Here we are.
Yeah.
Simplest explanation is always the truth. It's Jerry.
So, and again, they had success, relative successes with McCarthy and win 12 games. And that's not to say that this Brian Schottenheimer can't get this team back to his playoff team next year. I think there's a pretty good pathway for them to be a successful team next year, relatively speaking. But again, it comes down to process and results with Dallas. And then the ultimate process that awaits presumably Kellen Moore. It sounds like that might get finalized today. But the New Orleans Saints position with Kellen Moore after what was a very extensive interview process, and everybody eventually kind of says, "No thanks, I'm good."
Yeah. And
Kellen Moore, it kind of becomes the convenient thing with Philadelphia making the deep playoff run to lean into Kellen Moore and say, "Wow, this was the guy the whole time as we went through our process and looking for our next head coach."
Right. At some point, you just kind of had to lean into, well, it's gone on this long. We better get somebody off these Super Bowl teams or else this could be ugly. And that's, here's the deal. I'll say this, man. Kellen Moore's been up for jobs for a number of years. It's not a left field candidate. I think there's been a number of teams that could have hired Kellen Moore over the years, and nobody would have thought anything about it. So I think it was a goofy process. I think they should have learned a lot about the way that they're viewed in terms of operationally how things have gone and the mess that they're in, that so many people did pull out of that race. But I think they landed a good spot here with Kellen Moore. And, I'm not really concerned about Kellen Moore. I think Kellen Moore is a good coach. I think he'll give that team a decent chance to win. It's a matter of, are they willing to do the hard right things from a front office perspective to get this roster in position that it can actually have an opportunity to be competitive or continue to be in this very, very frustrating cycle of mediocrity.
Yeah, I don't think the answer is yes there.
I'm concerned about that.
Just listening to Mickey Loomis talk.
Yeah, dude.
And then they had the standoff with McCarthy and some of the same bits of feedback as far as personnel control and that he had with Dallas. It ends up, and he had a pre-existing relationship with Mickey Loomis. From what McCarthy was there in the early 2000s, I believe, is the offensive coordinator or on the staff. So that to me was the really revealing thing, that McCarthy bets on himself. He's probably really hoping to land a gig. He gets attached to New Orleans, and then even he's like, you know what? I don't think this is it for me. And all the messaging from Loomis, I think Saints fans, like I would be guarded about, I agree with you on Kellen Moore and the way he calls offense, and he did a nice job this year in Philadelphia, and his reputation in Dallas kind of got stained there at the end because of the goofy stuff with the playoff game. Mm-hmm. But they're going to have their hands full for sure as the New Orleans Saints. So let me ask you this. We'll put you on the spot real quick. The best situation and the worst situation, which is which?
I think the best situation is the Patriots. I think the worst situation is the Saints.
I would agree with you, where Patriots have cash to spend. Drake May should have an extended runway here. And then the Saints, just from an assets perspective, they're the polar opposite of that.
Good luck.
So That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, we appreciate you guys as always for checking out Locked On NFL Scouting. We are done for the day. We'll be back tomorrow with some NFL draft prospects, so we hope you come back and see us then.